The air in the barracks was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Rows of recruits sat stiffly on cold steel benches, their faces a mixture of fear and grim determination. Each one bore the weight of what was to come, though none dared voice it aloud. They were the survivors of humanity's shattered pride, the remnants of a species fighting not for dominance, but for the right to exist. Lieutenant Matisse paced before them, his boots clanking against the grated floor. His sharp features were illuminated by the harsh overhead lights, and the shadow of his lean frame flickered against the metal walls. Despite his wiry build, there was a commanding presence about him that made even the most skeptical recruits sit straighter. "You're here because someone thought you had potential," Matisse began, his voice cutting through the stale air like a blade. "Potential to be more than cannon fodder. Potential to remind the galaxy why humans are still here." The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. None of them felt particularly capable, let alone legendary. Most had been plucked from the remnants of a defeated Earth, farmers, mechanics, former soldiers, all thrown together in a last-ditch effort to mount a resistance. "You think you've been living under Groth rule for the last 20 years?" Matisse continued, stopping abruptly to lock eyes with the nearest recruit. "You haven't. You've been waiting. And now it's time." Outside, the faint hum of orbital engines reverberated through the walls. The Groth blockade had encircled Earth for decades, their massive ships a constant reminder of humanity's submission. Yet, for all their strength, the Groth had made one critical mistake: they had underestimated human patience. Matisse gestured to the hulking Sergeant Calder, who entered the room carrying a crate marked with the Coalition's faded emblem. Calder's face was a map of scars, his demeanor as unyielding as the steel plating on the walls. "Recruits, meet the M97 Whisper Grenade," Calder announced, his voice gruff but steady. He opened the crate, revealing rows of sleek, unassuming cylinders. "No flashy explosions, no fireworks. Just silence." A recruit raised his hand tentatively. "Silence, sir? How does that help?" Calder's grin was more a baring of teeth. "The Groth don't fear death. They fear disconnection. These grenades disrupt their biosonic network. Take away their hive link, and you take away their ability to think as one." The recruits leaned forward, their unease giving way to curiosity. For the first time, a spark of hope flickered in the room. "We're not just teaching you to fight," Matisse said, his tone soft but intense. "We're teaching you to dismantle an empire. And it starts tomorrow." At 0300 hours, the recruits were jolted awake by the blaring of alarms. The barracks erupted into chaos as men scrambled to don their gear. Matisse's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and unwavering. "Move! Drop ships are waiting. Your first mission starts now." The recruits filed into the hangar, where sleek black drop ships hummed with readiness. Calder stood by the nearest one, his expression as unyielding as ever. "Our target is a Groth supply convoy passing near Europa," Calder explained. "We hit them fast, hit them hard, and leave nothing behind." As the recruits strapped in, Matisse entered the drop ship, holding onto a railing as the engines roared to life. His gaze swept over the nervous faces. "This isn't a drill," he said. "This is your chance to show them what humans are made of. And let me tell you something, they're more afraid of us than you realize. They just don't know it yet." The drop ships launched, and the recruits felt the weight of gravity give way to the smooth glide of space. The convoy appeared on their monitors, a formation of bulky, slow-moving Groth vessels. Perfect targets. Matisse turned to Calder. "Cut the engines as we approach. No signatures." The hum of the engines faded, replaced by an eerie silence as the drop ships coasted toward their prey. The recruits held their breath as the Groth ships came into view, their massive hulls glinting faintly in the starlight. "Here's the plan," Matisse said, his voice calm but commanding. "We board their lead ship, disable communications, and plant the Whisper grenades. Once their hive link is severed, we take out the rest of the convoy." The recruits nodded, their faces pale but resolute. The drop ships latched onto the Groth vessel with a metallic thud. The airlock seals hissed, and the recruits followed Matisse and Calder into the dark corridors of the alien ship. The interior was dimly lit, with strange, pulsing lights running along the walls. The recruits moved in tight formation, their boots making barely a sound against the metal floor. The oppressive hum of the Groth biosonic network filled the air like a distant heartbeat. "Split into 2 teams," Matisse ordered, his voice a low whisper. "One to the comm center, the other to the cargo hold. Stay quiet, stay sharp." Calder led the first team, while Matisse stayed with the second. As they advanced, the low clicking of Groth soldiers echoed through the corridors. The recruits froze, their weapons at the ready. A single Groth warrior rounded the corner, its spindly limbs moving with unsettling precision. Before it could react, a recruit fired, the plasma shot striking the alien square in the chest. Matisse nodded approvingly. "Good shot. But now they'll know we're here. Move faster." The team reached the cargo hold, a massive chamber filled with alien technology and supplies. Matisse handed a whisper grenade to one of the recruits. "Set it here. Make it count." The recruit's hands trembled as he armed the device, the soft hum of the grenade activating the only indication of its deadly purpose. Suddenly, Calder's voice crackled over the comms. "Matisse, we've got company. They're converging on our position." "How many?" Matisse asked, his tone sharp. "Too many." Matisse didn't hesitate. "Fall back to the airlocks. We'll cover you." The recruits retraced their steps, plasma fire lighting up the corridors as Groth soldiers appeared from the shadows. One recruit fell, a Groth claw piercing his chest. Matisse didn't stop. "Keep moving!" he shouted, his rifle cutting down another alien. They reached the airlocks just as Calder's team arrived, their faces grim but alive. The drop ships waited, their guns trained on the Groth's ship. "Everyone on board!" Matisse shouted. As the last recruit scrambled inside, Matisse gave the order. "Detonate!" The whisper grenades activated, plunging the Groth's ship into an eerie silence. Then, the explosions began, tearing through the vessel and scattering its debris into the void. The recruits sat in stunned silence as the drop ships sped away. Matisse stood at the front, his expression unreadable. "This was the first step," he said quietly. "There's more to come." In the distance, Earth hung in the void, its blue-green surface a stark reminder of what they were fighting for. The silence of the barracks was shattered by the sharp clang of an alarm, a metallic cry that roused the recruits from restless sleep. The previous mission had left its mark, cuts, bruises, and haunted stares. But if the first strike against the Groth convoy had been a trial, today's announcement promised a crucible. Lieutenant Matisse stood at the center of the training ground, his voice cold as steel. "Yesterday, you disrupted their network. Today, they'll strike back. The Groth don't like to lose control." Sergeant Calder stepped forward, carrying a data tablet displaying a holographic map of Earth's orbital defenses. Red markers blinked ominously, Groth ships on the move. "They're targeting us," Calder explained, his voice steady. "Not just you. Us. Earth's resistance zones. They're calling it retribution." Matisse's eyes narrowed. "That's not retribution. That's panic. We've shown them that we're not beaten. Now, they're scrambling to remind us who's in charge." The recruits shifted uneasily. Some muttered under their breath, questioning whether a counterattack was wise so soon. Others looked to their weapons, their knuckles white against the grips. Matisse took a step forward, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "You're scared. Good. Use it," he said, his tone sharpening. "This fight isn't just about survival, it's about sending a message. They called us chaos. Let's show them what chaos can do." The recruits were deployed to one of the most critical resistance zones, Alpha Node, an underground command center hidden beneath the ruins of a once thriving city. The Groth's retaliation wasn't subtle. Orbital strikes had turned towering skyscrapers into craters, and fires raged unchecked through the rubble. The dropship landed in the heart of the destruction, its bay doors hissing open. The recruits filed out, their movements faster and more coordinated than before. The first mission had stripped away hesitation, replacing it with grim efficiency. "Secure the perimeter!" Calder barked. "We'll set up defenses before the Groth ground forces arrive." The recruits fanned out, their boots crunching over broken glass and debris. Plouffe, a wiry recruit with quick hands and a knack for improvisation, rigged a series of makeshift trip mines from scavenged materials. Zane, the group's quiet marksman, took position in a crumbling bell tower, his plasma rifle trained on the horizon. Matisse and Calder worked quickly to establish the central command point. The holographic map of the area glowed faintly amidst the smoke, displaying red markers converging on their location. "They'll hit us hard," Calder muttered. "This isn't just an attack. It's a message." "Then we'll send one back," Matisse replied, his voice calm but charged. "We hold the node. No matter what." The first wave hit just before dusk. The Groth soldiers moved with their characteristic precision, their hive-linked coordination turning the battlefield into a synchronized dance of destruction. They advanced in perfect lines, their claws gleaming in the flickering light of the fires. But the recruits were ready. Plouffe's mines detonated in a chain reaction, sending plumes of debris into the air and forcing the Groth to break formation. Zane's rifle cracked with precision, each shot cutting through the chaos to find its mark. "Keep them off balance!" Calder shouted, his voice rising above the din of battle. "Don't let them regroup!" The recruits responded with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. They moved like a single unit, their actions flowing together in a seamless rhythm. A team of 3 recruits led by Zane flanked the Groth, forcing the invaders into the kill zone of Plouffe's remaining traps. Still, the Groth pressed forward. Their numbers seemed endless, and their hive link made them relentless. Even as one fell, another stepped in to fill the gap. Matisse watched from the command point, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the next move. "It's time," he said to Calder. "Deploy the whisper grenades." Calder nodded and signaled to the recruits. The grenades were distributed, their sleek forms humming faintly in the recruits' hands. "Target their clusters," Calder instructed. "Break their coordination. Once the link is down, hit them hard." The recruits moved swiftly, their training kicking in. One by one, the whisper grenades were thrown into the advancing Groth lines. For a brief moment, the battlefield fell silent. The Groth soldiers froze mid-stride, their hive link severed. Confusion rippled through their ranks as they lost the cohesion that had always made them unstoppable. "Now!" Matisse shouted. The recruits surged forward, their plasma weapons lighting up the battlefield. The Groth faltered, their once synchronized movements devolving into chaos. For the first time, the recruits saw something new in the eyes of their enemies: fear. The victory was hard-fought but undeniable. As the last of the Groth retreated into the shadows, the recruits gathered at the command point, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of burned metal, but there was a sense of quiet triumph. "That's twice now," Plouffe said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We've beaten them twice." Calder crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Don't celebrate yet. This was a skirmish. The real fight is still coming." Matisse stepped forward, his gaze locking onto each recruit in turn. "Calder's right. The Groth will adapt. They'll come back stronger, and they'll come for Earth. We need to be ready." The recruits nodded, their determination unshaken. They had tasted victory, and though the cost was high, they were willing to pay it again. Later that night, Matisse stood on the observation deck, staring out at the distant glow of Earth on the horizon. Calder joined him, his heavy footsteps echoing in the stillness. "They're scared," Calder said, breaking the silence. "The Groth. They didn't expect us to fight like this." Matisse nodded. "That's the advantage of being underestimated. They thought we were broken. But they've never seen what humans do when we've got nothing left to lose." Calder smirked, his usual gruff demeanor softening slightly. "And when they hit back?" Matisse's expression hardened. "Then we remind them that desperation is just another word for strategy." The 2 men stood in silence, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them. The recruits had proven their worth, but the battles to come would test them in ways no training could prepare for. For now they had won. But in the depths of the Groth fleet, retaliation was already taking shape, a storm gathering on the horizon, waiting to be unleashed. The recruits braced themselves for the inevitable. The victory at Alpha Node had been hard-fought, but it had also painted a target on their backs. The Groth weren't known for their patience, and their response came faster and harder than anyone anticipated. At 0400 hours, the command center's alarms blared, jolting everyone awake. Matisse stood in the center of the operations room, his face illuminated by the flickering red light of the tactical display. The map of Earth's orbital defenses was a sea of red markers, Groth ships converging on key resistance zones. "This isn't a raid," Calder said, his voice tight. "They're launching a full-scale assault." Matisse's jaw clenched as he studied the map. "And they're starting with us." The recruits scrambled to action, their training kicking in as they fortified Alpha Node's defenses. Plouffe rigged new traps along the underground corridors, while Zane positioned himself in the ruins above, his rifle trained on the advancing Groth forces. The rest of the team worked tirelessly to move supplies, reinforce barricades, and set up fallback positions. "This isn't going to be like last time," Calder warned, addressing the recruits as they gathered around the central table. "The Groth are angry, and angry enemies don't make mistakes twice. They'll throw everything at us." Matisse stepped forward, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "That's exactly what we want. If they focus on Alpha Node, they'll expose their fleet. We're not just holding the line, we're buying time for the other resistance cells to strike." Zane, perched on a crate near the back, raised an eyebrow. "Buying time sounds a lot like a death sentence." "Only if you stop fighting," Matisse replied, his tone sharp. "Stick to your training, trust each other, and remember, the Groth don't know how to fight us when we're unpredictable. Use that." The recruits exchanged glances, their fear tempered by resolve. The room fell silent as they prepared for the battle ahead. The first wave hit with the force of a tidal wave. Groth soldiers poured into the ruins above Alpha Node, their movements swift and coordinated. Plasma fire lit up the darkened sky as drones hovered overhead, scanning for weak points. The recruits responded with precision, their traps and ambushes disrupting the Groth advance. From his position in the bell tower, Zane picked off key targets, his shots precise and unerring. "I've got eyes on their forward command," he reported over the comms. "Looks like they're setting up for a full breach." "Not on my watch," Plouffe muttered, rigging a makeshift explosive from salvaged materials. He placed it in a collapsed tunnel, its blinking light a promise of destruction. "This'll slow them down." Below ground, Matisse and Calder directed the recruits, their voices cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line!" Matisse shouted as Groth soldiers breached the lower levels. "Push them back! Don't let them regroup!" The recruits fought with everything they had, their movements honed by weeks of relentless training. They weren't just reacting, they were adapting, turning every piece of debris, every shadow, into a weapon. Despite their efforts, the Groth were relentless. Their hive link allowed them to coordinate with terrifying efficiency, and for every soldier the recruits took down, 2 more seemed to take their place. "We can't hold this forever," Calder said, firing his rifle into the advancing Groth lines. "We don't have to," Matisse replied. He tapped his comms unit. "Zane, are the whisper grenades ready?" "Locked and loaded," Zane replied. "Just say the word." "No," Matisse ordered. The grenades detonated in perfect sequence, their hum cutting through the chaos like a blade. For a brief moment, the battlefield fell eerily silent. The Groth soldiers froze mid-movement, their hive link severed. Confusion rippled through their ranks as they lost the cohesion that had always been their greatest strength. "Hit them now!" Matisse shouted. The recruits surged forward, their weapons blazing. The once relentless Groth soldiers faltered, their movements erratic and disjointed. Zane picked off stragglers from above, while Plouffe and his team cleared the corridors with brutal efficiency. The tide began to turn. The Groth, unaccustomed to fighting as individuals, retreated in disarray. For the first time, the recruits saw fear in the eyes of their enemies. The victory was short-lived. Before the recruits could regroup, the ground beneath their feet shook with the force of an orbital strike. The ceiling of the underground command center cracked, dust and debris raining down as explosions echoed above. "They're trying to collapse the node!" Calder shouted, pulling a recruit to safety as a beam fell nearby. Matisse's mind raced. The Groth weren't just retaliating, they were trying to bury the resistance in one decisive blow. "Everyone, fall back to the secondary tunnels!" Matisse ordered. "We can't hold this position." The recruits moved quickly, their fear fueling their urgency. Plouffe detonated his remaining traps to cover their retreat, while Zane provided overwatch, his shots keeping the Groth at bay. As they reached the tunnel entrance, Matisse paused, his gaze sweeping the ruins of Alpha Node. It had been their home, their stronghold. Now it was a tomb. "We'll rebuild," Calder said, his voice low but steady. "We always do." Matisse nodded, his resolve hardening. "But first we make them pay." The recruits regrouped in a hidden cavern farther from the front lines. The mood was grim, but there was no time for mourning. Matisse and Calder worked quickly to establish a new command point, their focus shifting to the next phase of their plan. "They think they've crushed us," Matisse said, addressing the recruits. "They think we'll scatter and fade. But they've underestimated us again." "What's the plan?" Plouffe asked, his voice weary but eager. Matisse activated a holographic display of the Groth fleet. "We take the fight to them. Their hive link makes them powerful, but it also makes them vulnerable. If we can hit their command ship, we can sever the link at its source." Zane let out a low whistle. "The command ship? That's suicide." "Not if we make them believe we're somewhere else," Matisse replied. "We'll draw their attention with decoy strikes, make them think Earth is our focus. While they're distracted, we infiltrate the command ship and plant the final whisper charge." The recruits exchanged glances, their exhaustion giving way to a spark of determination. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was something humanity had learned to weaponize. Calder grinned, his scarred face lighting up with a fierce energy. "Well, recruits, you heard the man. Let's show the Groth what chaos really looks like." The recruits nodded, their resolve unshaken. They had survived the fires of Alpha Node, and now they were ready to carry the fight to the stars. As the final preparations were made, Matisse stood on the edge of the cavern, staring out at the night sky. The Groth ships glimmered in the distance, their presence a constant reminder of the battle still to come. "We're not just fighting for Earth," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "We're fighting for the right to exist." Behind him, Calder approached, his voice carrying a note of grim humor. "Think they're ready?" Matisse didn't look back. "They don't have a choice." The next phase of the battle awaited, and this time, there was no room for error. Humanity's survival depended on the recruits' ability to outthink, outfight, and outlast an enemy that had never known defeat. And as Matisse turned to face his team, his expression hard and unyielding, one thing was clear: the Groth were about to learn that chaos wasn't just a weakness, it was humanity's greatest strength. The cold silence of space surrounded the drop ships as they drifted toward the Groth command vessel. The recruits sat strapped into their seats, their faces lit by the faint glow of their helmets' displays. The mission briefing had been simple, almost brutal in its clarity: infiltrate the command ship, sever the hive link, and cripple the Groth fleet. It was a plan with no margin for error, no room for hesitation. Lieutenant Matisse stood at the front of the drop ship, one hand gripping the overhead rail as the other tapped against the edge of a data console. His voice, calm and measured, cut through the tense quiet. "This is the last step," he said, his gaze sweeping over the recruits. "You've fought their ground forces. You've defended our strongholds. But this is the heart of the enemy. Their command ship isn't just another target, it's their nerve center. If we take it out, the entire fleet collapses." Sergeant Calder stood by the airlock, his massive frame a reassuring presence. "We're dropping in silent. No weapons fire until we breach. Once we're inside, stick to your teams, Follow orders, and remember your training. You've already shown you can beat the Groth on the ground. Now we show them they can bleed in the stars. The recruits nodded, their fear overshadowed by determination. They were past the point of doubt, their survival tied to the success of this mission. Failure wasn't an option, not for themselves, not for Earth. The drop ships coasted toward the massive Groth command vessel, its angular structure bristling with weapons and shield emitters. The Groth's defensive grid was a labyrinth of patrols and automated turrets, but the stolen Groth identification codes held. The ships slipped through the perimeter undetected, docking with a faint metallic thud against the command ship's airlocks. Seals are secure, Calder said, his voice low. We're in. Matisse signaled for the team to move. The airlocks hissed open, and the recruits poured into the dark corridors of the Groth ship, their boots whispering against the metal floor. The air was thick with the hum of the hive link, a sound that pulsed like a heartbeat through the vessel. The team split into two groups. Matisse led the strike team toward the hive link node, the core of the Groth's neural network. Calder took the second team to sabotage the ship's propulsion systems, ensuring no escape for the Groth fleet's command. The corridors were dimly lit, lined with alien glyphs that pulsed faintly. The recruits moved in silence, their weapons at the ready. Every step felt like walking through a graveyard, the oppressive hum of the hive link a constant reminder of the enemy's omnipresence. They encountered the first Groth patrol near a junction. Matisse raised a hand, signaling the team to hold. The alien soldiers moved with their characteristic precision, their spindly limbs gliding across the floor as they scanned the area. The recruits waited, their breath held, until the patrol passed. Matisse gave the signal, and the team moved swiftly, bypassing the patrol and continuing toward the node. The hive link node was housed in a massive chamber, its center dominated by a towering structure of glowing, pulsating organic machinery. The hum of the hive link was deafening here, the air vibrating with the power of the Groth network. Matisse turned to the recruits, his voice barely above a whisper. Set the charges. Quickly. The recruits fanned out, planting whisper grenades and high-yield explosives around the node. Their hands moved with practiced precision, their fear outweighed by the urgency of the task. Suddenly, the comms crackled to life. Calder's voice came through, tense but controlled. We've got company. They know we're here. How many? Matisse asked, his tone sharp. All of them, Calder replied. Matisse's jaw tightened. Hold them off as long as you can. We'll finish here and rendezvous at the extraction point. The recruits worked faster, their movements a blur as they armed the final charges. The low clicking and guttural growls of Groth soldiers echoed through the corridors, drawing closer with every second. They're here, Zane muttered, his rifle trained on the chamber's entrance. The first Groth soldiers burst into the room, their claws gleaming in the pulsing light. Plasma fire erupted, lighting the chamber with flashes of red and blue. The recruits fought with ferocity, their training turning fear into action. Hold them off! Matisse shouted. We need more time! Plouffe, always quick with improvisation, lobbed a makeshift explosive into the advancing Groth lines, the blast scattering their formation. Zane picked off targets with surgical precision, his shots cutting through the chaos. Finally, the last charge was set. Matisse signaled the team to fall back, his voice cutting through the noise. Move! Now! The recruits retreated, fighting their way back through the corridors as more Groth soldiers poured in. The ship trembled with the force of their battle, the hum of the hive link growing erratic as the charges counted down. They reached the extraction point just as Calder's team arrived, their faces grim but alive. The drop ships were waiting, their engines humming with readiness. Everyone on board! Matisse shouted, firing one last shot before the airlock doors sealed behind him. Detonate! He ordered. The charges exploded in a blinding flash, the hive link node shattering into molten shards. For a brief moment, the entire Groth fleet froze, their neural networks severed. The once coordinated ships and soldiers faltered, their precision replaced by chaos. On board the drop ship, the recruits watched through the viewport as the Groth command vessel erupted in flames. Debris scattered into the void, the glow of the explosion reflected in their wide eyes. "It's over," Plouffe whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Matisse shook his head. "Not yet. They're still out there. But now, they're vulnerable." The return to Earth was bittersweet. The Groth fleet, now fragmented and leaderless, retreated into the depths of space. Humanity had won its first true victory, but the cost was written in the faces of the recruits, scarred, weary, and changed forever. Matisse stood on the observation deck, staring out at the blue-green planet below. Calder joined him, his usual gruff demeanor softened by exhaustion. "They'll come back," Calder said. "Let them," Matisse replied. "They've seen what we can do. And next time, we'll be ready." The recruits gathered below, their voices quiet but filled with a sense of triumph. They had been thrown into the fire and emerged as something stronger, something the Groth would never forget. As the stars stretched endlessly before them, one thing was certain: humanity wasn't just surviving. It was fighting back, and the galaxy would learn to fear the chaos it had once dismissed.